It's been 3 weeks since George Floyd was killed in broad daylight by 4 police officers, and we are still seeking justice. We are protesting in the streets, and if you haven't already, please join us. If you can't join us with your body, join us with your voice, and we ask that you educate yourself so that you can be a part of the solution. I want to dedicate this Miseducation Monday to Robert Fuller and his family. Robert was found in Palmdale, and if you don't know this story, I ask you to look it up right now. I also want to dedicate this to Malcolm Harsh, who was found 50 miles away from where Robert Fuller was found in the same condition 2 weeks prior to Robert Fuller, and no one is talking about it. It is also being deemed a suicide. We all know there was foul play at hand in both accounts, and I ask you to do your part to educate yourself and educate others. It's time to wake up. This week we're talking about Emmett Louis Till. He was the catalyst for the civil rights movement. What happened to him was barbaric, and his mother said, "I want the world to know what happened to my son so that it may never happen again." Unfortunately, we all know history continues to repeat itself. It has even repeated itself in the last few days with Robert Fuller and Malcolm Harsh. I just learned about Emmett Louis Till 3 weeks ago. I had no idea who he was. I had no idea that he was the catalyst for the civil rights movement, because his murder was horrific and barbaric and completely uncalled for. Maybe they decided to leave it out because more than 2 white men murdered him and they all got away with it. Maybe they decided to leave it out because they like covering things up. Regardless, I should have known about this sooner, but I know about it now, and I'm going to tell you about this now too. Emmett Louis Till was born July 25th, 1941. His mother said he was the happiest baby. He was always smiling, always laughing. She said they were like best friends from the moments that he came into this world. She said one of her favorite things about him was his teeth. He had the greatest smile, and he was always showing them off. In the summer of 1955, Mrs. Till allowed Emmett to go on a summer vacation all the way from Chicago to Money, Mississippi, where he would spend his time with her brother, Moses, and his cousins. He was so excited about this because he had never been to the Deep South. He had never been to Mississippi, and he couldn't wait his newfound glory and independence as a 14-year-old boy. His mother was worried, but she ultimately felt like this was time for him to do something on his own. So she sent him off on the train, and he almost forgot to hug her. So Mrs. Till cried out, "Emmett, where are you going? How do I know I'll ever see you again?" She had no idea that that was the last thing she would ever say to her son. He quickly came back and gave her a hug, and he took off his watch, and he gave it to his mother, and he said, "Here, now I'll always be with you." She said, "What about your ring?" And he said, "I'm going to keep that for me." He would always wear his father's ring, which had his father's initials, which were also his same initials, L.T., Louis Till. This is really important because later on, Emmett is so unrecognizable that the only way he was able to be identified fully was by his ring. And he said, "Okay, Mom, I'm ready to go." And he got on the train. Emmett had never been to Mississippi before. He didn't realize that the South was so very different than the North. It's 1955, so there are still segregation laws in effect, which is just another form of slavery. And if you don't know what that means, you should watch 13th by Ava DuVernay on Netflix. Emmett and his cousins had had a very long day in the sun picking cotton, and they got some change from their day of work. So they decided to go into Greenwood, Mississippi to Bryant's grocery store and get a few snacks. They had a moment where they kind of split off, but they knew not to leave each other alone for too long. So everyone went to get their treats, and Emmett went inside the store to get some bubble gum. No one was inside the store. It was just Emmett and Mrs. Bryant, Carolyn Bryant, who was behind the counter. All we know is that Emmett went in there to get bubble gum, and he came back out. It's important to note that Emmett was so playful. He was a dapper, charming 14-year-old. He loved to make people laugh and make jokes. His cousin has said in the documentary, The Untold Story of Emmett Louis Till, there's been discrepancy over the years as to whether or not he whistled at her because Mrs. Bryant claimed later on in court that he sexually accosted her. However, the whistle was not a lie. The whistle did happen. He was just a 14-year-old boy being playful, but his cousins and his friends knew you do not whistle at a white woman in Mississippi. Roy Bryant asks his stepbrother, J.W. Millam, to come with him to Moses's house to pick up Emmett and punish him. Roy Bryant and J.W. Millam show up to the door with a flashlight and a gun. Moses says, "What can I do for you?" Roy Bryant says, "I'm looking for Emmett. You better get out of the way and let me do what I need to do." It was a very, very scary moment. Simeon, who was in bed with Emmett, remembers them coming into the room. He remembers the door being opened, swinging open, two men standing there with flashlights and guns. They looked at Emmett, they made Emmett put his shoes on, and they took him out of the room. Roy and JW told Moses they were just going to take Emmett up the street, give him a few lashings for what he did to his wife, and bring him back home. After a few hours had passed, Simeon and Moses and Elizabeth had all thought, "Where is he? Where is he?" And then daylight, August 28th, 1955, which is almost 65 years ago. They found Emmett's body tied to a cotton gin fan. He had been thrown in the river. The sheriff at the time decided when they found his body that they would quickly bury him. They didn't want anyone to see what happened to the boy. They didn't want anyone to know the truth. His mother found out that something had happened to her son. She got the Chicago officials involved, and they quickly got over to Greenwood where the sheriff was about to bury Emmett, and they stopped the burial from happening. Mrs. Till asked for them to open the casket. I have to give a trigger warning because I will be showing pictures of what happened to his body on the request of his mother, who asked that the world see what happened to her son so that everyone would know the truth. She said that she saw one eyeball hanging from his eye socket and resting on his cheek. The other eyeball was missing. His tongue had been cut off and it was resting below his chin. His teeth that she loved so much were all missing except for two. There had been an axe that had gone into the top of his head, splitting his face from his skull, and he had a half-severed head. And on top of all this, they cut off his genitals and they put a bullet through his head so big that Mrs. Till has said she could see to the other side. She could see light through her son's temple. There were a few eyewitnesses on accounts of the men picking Emmett up, on accounts of a fire that had burned in a nearby plantation. And they also had one account, Willie Lewis, who walked by and saw 5 men in a truck holding Emmett. And he saw them take Emmett into the plantation house. And he heard Emmett scream, screaming over and over again, saying, "Please, God, don't do it again." The NAACP helped Mrs. Till take these men to trial for the murder and kidnapping of Emmett Louis Till. There was a huge trial, an all-white jury, and a white judge. One of the craziest accounts of this trial is a memory that there were tip jars on the outside of the pews inside the trial area where people could give money and donations to not Mrs. Till, but to the Bryants and the Millam family. There were tip jars for the murderers and their family. They proceeded to have a trial. They brought in their eyewitnesses. They did the best that they could. Even at one point, Moses was known to have bravely stood up and pointed directly at Roy Bryant and J.W. Millam and said, "They were the ones that came to my house and took away my boy." The trial only took a few days. But it's when Mrs. Till saw the faces of the jurymen as they filed out to decide the fate of Roy Bryant and J.W. Millam that she knew the verdict would be not guilty. She saw their faces and she knew they had no desire to put them away. They had no desire to bring justice to this little boy. She decided to have everyone in her party leave. They tried to push back, but she said no. This is not going our way. And they left the courthouse before they ever heard a verdict. The jury met for 45 minutes. The only reason they met for 45 minutes was to make it look better. They even said they drank sodas and ate snacks to make it last longer before coming back out and saying not guilty. Roy Bryant and J.W. Millam were found interviewed afterwards with their wives, the happiest faces. They made out on camera, everyone cheering them in the background. The murderers were set free. Mrs. Till said, "There is no verbal account I could ever give that would match the visual imagery of my son's face and what they did to his body." She wanted the world to see the truth, and this was the catalyst for the civil rights movement. Pastor Al Sharpton was quoted to say, "Up until now, only men feared for their lives, but after Emmett, we all knew that children had to fear for their lives too." 4 months later, Roy Bryant and J.W. Millam were given $4,000 in an interview for Look magazine to tell the true story, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. However, they couldn't be convicted and tried again due to the double jeopardy rule. Not only did they get off on murder and kidnapping, they were paid to tell their story. They were tipped by their community, and they were praised. FBI reopened the case 15 years ago when this documentary came out because so many people in the community pressured them to do so. We still, to this day, have no answers to the truth and the people who were involved other than Roy Bryant and J.W. Millam. But recently, in a New York Times article, Carolyn Bryant, who is still alive and seemingly well, did an interview for New York Times where she admitted that when she told them in court that he had sexually accosted her, that he had said, "Hey baby, want a date?" that he had touched her waist, she admitted that none of that happened. She admitted she lied. 65 years later, people are comparing Carolyn Bryant to Amy Cooper. The power of a white woman and the power of her lies has the ability to take men's lives. I bring up this story because Robert Fuller and Malcolm Harsh have been murdered. Nobody knows what happened to their bodies. They say it was suicide, but we haven't even seen a true autopsy report. Just like the sheriff wanted to bury Emmett Till in the ground so that no one could see what happened to him, the sheriffs of Palmdale and Victorville doing the exact same thing, covering it up and acting like it wasn't a murder. Mrs. Till was brave in making everyone look at her son's face and her son's body. That even though in the case of Robert Fuller and Malcolm Harsh, they say it was suicide, just remember, they often lie. What is happening in this country is abhorrent. I am asking you that if you have not joined this fight, why? What are you so afraid of? You probably have no reason to be afraid, and that's your privilege. Do your research. Join us in protests. Use your body, use your voice. Email, phone call, educate, read, look with your eyes, open your heart. I believe in you. You are able.